Hi, my name is Jakov, and you're watching The Swiftbird, a channel where I explore technology and software. How do you feel about legacy code? Would it be okay for you to maintain the code that is a couple years old, 5 years old, what about 10 years old? Or would you be confused, maybe even irritated by the way things worked back then? By how inconvenient or inefficient they were. Imagine, for example, writing the networking layer before Codable was added in Swift 4. We, the developers, are used to having new language features arrive every couple of months. Those features generally make the programming language easier and more enjoyable to work with. That usually means that the syntax becomes more concise and common tests can be done with less work. Again, think about Codable. Well, how would you feel if you were going to modernize an app that's at least 15 years old, written in Objective-C and doesn't even use Arc? That's how I would describe the little exercise I took up in my spare time. And that's what I'd like to tell you about today. On the Swiftbird, I explore tech and software at a deeper level. I'm not very interested in just showing you how to write code for this or that, because there are many excellent tutorials already posted on the internet. I often use them myself and I'm grateful to the people who make them. But the Swiftbird is about digging deeper and uncovering some of the less talked about but still important topics, such as accessibility, privacy, and efficiency. If you embrace this approach, you can support me by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing the link with someone who may find it helpful. Now back to the video. The app in question is called Caffeine. It was originally published by a company named Lighthead Software back in the mid-2000s. It's a very small and very simple utility, which does exactly one thing. It keeps your Mac awake, just as caffeine keeps you awake. Though caffeine doesn't work on me that well. Never mind. So, the Caffeine app prevents the Mac from displaying the screensaver and eventually going to sleep. It's a neat tool to have when you're reading a long document or maybe exporting a video. Caffeine was first developed for macOS X Tiger and last updated for Snow Leopard. The company then went out of business, unfortunately. As you can imagine, a lot of things have changed since Snow Leopard. If you try to run a 2000s era program on Ventura, it will very likely not launch at all. Though Caffeine did launch, I guess mainly because it was such a simple thing, macOS was not happy about it. It threw security alerts and initially didn't even give the option to launch the app. You had to do some tricks to bypass the security system. Also, it was in no way optimized for the modern hardware and software standards, from the Retina displays to dark mode. In other words, Caffeine had just become obsolete. And though you could find many alternatives, both paid and free, there was something about Caffeine that I especially liked. Probably its minimalism in the user interface and the simplicity in function. So I was glad to learn that in 2018 the app's original developer had open sourced the entire codebase, which was pretty compact, I'd say. To me, it was great news because of two reasons. First, I could learn more about how Mac software had been designed in the early days of Cocoa. And second, I had a chance to fix the issues and get the app back on track just for myself. I saw this as a great engineering exercise, but most importantly, a great journey. You can find the original Caffeine code at the link in the description. Though the code was uploaded to GitHub in 2018, it seems to have been last changed way earlier, around 2009. It's written in Objective-C and doesn't use Arc or Auto Layout because neither existed back then. I started with analyzing the code from the software design perspective. My goal was to make two lists of changes. One with the things that are absolutely required to make the app working so it doesn't trigger those unnerving security alerts. And the other with various nice-to-haves based on today's software design best practices. The first thing that I noticed was that the application delegate was responsible for most of the app's functionality, preventing the computer from sleeping, handling user preferences, managing the app's life cycle, and much more. I guess when Caffeine was first developed back in 2006, it was fine to have everything inside a single component. Actually, from what I know, the entire culture of software development was still being formed back then. You can find evidence of that in particular in the professional literature, and I personally found it in Uncle Bob's Clean Code. The book had been published in 2008, and when I read it years later, many of the recommendations seemed obvious or even redundant in today's world, like naming variables in a way that makes sense or not making a single object responsible for everything. These things feel totally natural today. I mean, can it be any different? But apparently, back in the days, it was no less than a revelation. And that's what I enjoy about the industry. It's constantly evolving, and not just in terms of hardware specs or new languages, but also in terms of the programmer's mindset. So, once I'd gone through the repo's contents, I came up with a roadmap of changes. I realized that most of the issues which clashed with the Mac security components could be fixed by simply rebuilding the code with a valid sign-in certificate. Everything else, and there was a lot that could be done, was completely optional. But as I said, it was an exercise, or a challenge if you will. So I decided to not stop at rebuilding and re-signing the app. I went further to revise the architecture and also add support for the latest standards that macOS users expect, such as the dark mode or high-resolution icons. Here's a funny thing, by the way. At first, I thought that compiling a 15-year-old Objective-C code would be an obstacle. But in reality, I was able to run it in Xcode 14 without an issue. And all I needed to do was just add a couple missing semicolons and auto-update some API calls. What do you say to that, Swift? It was very easy. I'd even say too easy. So I continued the journey. And here's a few things that I've done, also why I did them and what I learned while modernizing this ancient app. The first thing that bothered me was the number of tasks the app delegate was responsible for. At the time of development, it's pretty convenient to keep everything inside a single component, because you don't have to think about the overall app architecture. But later in the process, it will very likely cause problems, especially when the app grows and gains new features. Extending an already overloaded component adds mental pressure, and because of that, it very often results in bugs. I decided to create 3 new components and encapsulate different parts of the app inside them. First, I moved the sleep prevention features to the sleep controller, whose interface exposes only a few methods for activating the app, deactivating it, and also checking the sleep prevention status. Since other components of the app may need to know about those changes, I also introduced the sleep controller delegate protocol. For now, it's conformed by the app delegate, which after all my changes turned into a kind of an entry point or the root component. I don't think it's perfect and I have plans to add a proper root, but that can be done later. Second, the app delegate lost the responsibility for managing the preferences window. This job moved to the preferences controller. To my surprise, app preferences had been implemented in a brilliant way I didn't even know about, because I hadn't worked with Mac apps before. I'll get back to it in a minute when I'll be talking about the UI. Because of that, the controller needed only one method for presenting the preferences window. Finally, I moved the UI logic to the menu bar controller. It is responsible for displaying the menu and handling user selection. The interface turned out pretty compact too, as it had just 2 methods, one for adding the icon to the menu bar and the other for updating its state. The second method is called when the sleep controller reports status changes to its delegate. So you can see how the app delegate is now the central point connecting all the components. The menu bar icon itself had already been implemented separately, which was a good news. I did, however, change its interface so it no longer exposed the unneeded stuff, such as the interface builder outlets. Speaking of interface builder, here comes the UI part. In the repo, I found the user interface in the nib format. Not zip, but nib. It's an older format, and the modern versions of Xcode no longer support it. But as I learned after a quick search, the command line tools include a utility for converting nibs to zips. Once I ran the command, the output zip file was pretty much workable. The UI did not use auto layout, because it was introduced only later in line. I left it as is for now and only moved the menu and the preferences window to separate zips. When it came to working on the preferences controller, I realized the checkmarks for managing the app settings did not have any outlets in the code file. Why? because they were bound directly to values in user defaults. I didn't know about this feature, and it's certainly not present when you work with iOS apps. But apparently a form of reactive data flow was already available in AppKit back in the mid-2000s. I left any redesign for a future version and focused on minor usability enhancements, such as adding keyboard shortcuts for quick activation of the app. It's hard to believe, but the 15 years old interface really didn't need much of a change, and even the dark mode got enabled automatically. The icons did need an update though, because the old ones were too small to look good on the Retina display, so I just designed new ones. I'm not a UI designer, not even close, and doing this myself was probably the riskiest part of the entire project, but I think the results turned out pretty good. The menu bar icons have embraced the simplicity of the Big Sur era graphics, and the app icon has swapped the old cinema display frame for the more recent aluminum iMac. The coffee cup is still present, of course. With my changes, Caffeine has reached a point where it's once again usable and up to the modern standards. In fact, the results seem good enough to put the app on the Mac App Store. You can check it out and judge for yourself at the link in the description. But of course, there's more that I can do in the future. The entire app can be rewritten in Swift, which would bring a huge advantage in the form of additional memory safety and nice syntactic features such as Swift enums. I've already added this step to my V2 roadmap, so stay tuned for an app update. As an afterword, I really enjoyed developing for the Mac, both the process and technologies. Caffeine uses Apple's Cocoa framework, which is almost 25 years old. For sure, its paradigms are becoming less competitive compared to the shiniest frameworks of today, but Cocoa is still very robust for built-in Mac native software. It features the speed, efficiency, and small file sizes that no Electron-based app can offer. In the near future, I'll be looking for more opportunities to practice in Mac development. Besides Cocoa, I might even try SwiftUI on the Mac, even though I'm still really skeptical about it. That's it for today's SwiftBird video. Tell me in the comments how you feel about working with legacy code, maybe not as ancient as the one I showed you today. Or tell me what you think about the video in general. If you found it helpful, please push the like button. Subscribe to the SwiftBird to stay tuned for future videos. Have a good time.